It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all for this very interesting Thinkers Dialogue with Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Uh, Quite interestingly, I don't think that Dr. Kumar needs an introduction because he heads the primary think tank of the country, the government's think tank, that is Niti Aayog. But I would like to say a few things about him. I just got to know Dr. Kumar a couple of years back, but I must admit that I've been following his work since I was a young student when I was doing my PhD. He was a professor at that point in time, and I was always reading his work and trying to see what he's doing and what is he writing, how is he thinking. From my personal point of view, one of the sharpest minds I've met, but behind the sharpest mind is one of the simplest persons that you'll ever meet. Uh, in fact, the most interesting thing that I actually find with Dr. Kumar is that he will ask you such a simple question that will floor you with that depthness of that question itself. It could look very simple, but it'll just floor you with the deepness or the depth of the question. And I always get flabbergasted. I always get worried if I have to enter his chamber, and then what is the next question he'll ask, and I have to be prepared with it. So that is where Dr. Kumar is. But we must not forget, he is one very interesting person who's actually had hand in the development of Indian economy. A lot of us don't recognize it, or a lot of us don't know it, but he was the economic advisor when India actually implemented the economic reforms of 1991. So he has an imprint on whatever is happening in India in the last 30 years. Today, we are celebrating the 30th year anniversary for the economic reforms, but a lot of us might not even realize that it is he who was actually instrumental in many, many ways in terms of whatever actually happened on the ground in 1990. It was he and his team who were actually working on that thing. Again, somebody who's written many books, but I found two of his books which were just amazing in terms of the depth of information and the quality of analysis. One is Modi and His Challenges. That is a book that he published in the last few years. And then another book which is called Exploding Aspirations. If any one of you has not followed his articles, I would suggest that you should look at this book, which is a collection of essays wherein he writes about many things, including macroeconomic issues to sectoral issues to reform and political process on South Asia, on Indian economy and global economy and such things. So he's just there in terms of like he's been there in terms of assessing as to whatever is happening in India. Beyond being the vice chairman of Niti Aayog, he is the chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. And then, of course, in the past, he has actually been the head of FICCI. He has actually been associated with the finest think tanks in the country. If I recollected correctly, he was, of course, the chairman of ICRIAR or the CEO for ICRIAR for many years. Then he has actually worked with CPR. But I think today he sits at a cusp of a place wherein he's influencing us or influencing lives of 3 billion people. Dr. Kumar will never want to agree with it, but I think I must say that he is one person who is actually having a huge impact. So, Dr. Kumar, it is absolutely a privilege for us to really have you with us for this Thinkers Dialogue.
Thank you, Amit. I think you embarrassed me enough, but good to hear that. And it's a privilege to be here in Niti Aayog, I must say. And I have to thank the Prime Minister to have picked me up from nowhere, as it were. But yes, one is trying one's level best to make a difference, and that's the only thing. And I must. I always remember that as a student in modern school in the 60s, we used to sing a bhajan called Bharat Hamara Desh Hai और इसका ऋण हम पर बहुत और इस ऋण की खातिर हम कुछ ना कुछ कर जाएंगे. So I'm just trying to do that kuch na kuch, and I hope it will count.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. In fact, this is where the humility is. So, but not to embarrass you, sir, but we'll quickly dive into the conversation.
Yeah.
So, you've been privy to some of the most interesting conversations in the past. You have been somebody who has really driven the agenda for economic reforms. What do you think has been the journey in the last 3 decades? What have been the hits and the misses?
For one, and actually, is that I've been a member of a team which drove the economic reform in 1991, and I think the leaders of the team, were very, very good people, and they did whatever best they can. And I was very fortunate for that. The UPSC selected me for that position in 1991, and I joined as an economic advisor. And in the 3 decades, I think, you know, and we keep talking about it in India before 1991 and India after 1991, because things did change. And I think the biggest change that is still happening and unfolding is is the uh, is the is the greatest space for private enterprise in the country, which had been, India has been for centuries a country which has been driven by private enterprise, entrepreneurs, business people, etc. And we've had some of the best. We have some of the best businesses and long tradition. But for about 3 decades or so, that was pushed back. About at least 4 decades, it was pushed back, and we are moving in the direction of sort of a planned, centrally planned, statist economy, as it were. And 1991, all that began to change, and I think that process is still going on. And I must confess, I must say here, without and with all objectivity, as far as I can say, that what's happened in the last 7 years has added to that direction, has given that direction and that momentum much bigger sort of push than what was done during the 90s. So the 90s, as I said at the beginning, and as you know, the beginning is very difficult because you've got to move a ball from from a still position. That's difficult. But then again we went into a bit of a trough, and now I'm seeing that this government's commitment to private enterprise and this government's commitment, to withdraw the state from areas where it's not supposed to be, and to focus on areas like delivery to the bottom of the pyramid, to make a last mile delivery more efficient, governance more transparent, to do it. I think that's the big change that I find that's happened now in the last. And I must say here that the reforms undertaken in the last 7 years have been far more difficult ones to tackle, like the IBC or the GST, or the reform of the income tax, mechanism, compliance, or and several others. So the thing really is that I think all of that said, the question can be asked as to that why India has not done as well as it should have done or it could have done. And I think this is a complex answer. We have been a bit unlucky in some sense with the pandemic and so on. When we were prepared to take off, it hit us right there. But also, I think it takes a much bigger effort than what one had thought to change the direction, to change the way things work, and to and to and to and to you know and to reverse, as it were, the legacy that we've had here, in the government. So I think uh, we can, we could have done better, except for the fact that we found it difficult, to change the style of governance, not just in the center, but also in the states, because the states are equally important. So but some of these reforms, some of these measures have begun to show results. And I think it's very clear that at least what Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi said long ago, that only 10 paisa of the expenditure reaches the real beneficiaries, that's no longer true. And I think that's changed for that's changed irrevocably. That last mile delivery, to the beneficiary, to the direct benefit transfer, to different schemes, all of that. And I can reel out many sort of examples here. That has changed for sure, and that I think is the beginning of a very good trend, because I think that will then empower the people, and that will make the lives of the people much better, so that what we now will have is we'll have a perceptible improvement in the change in the lives of those who are at the bottom of the pyramid, what Francois Bourgogne called, the last decile, and to measure that. And I think that's the beginning. I think as growth picks up in the coming years, as it will, as it must, you'll see that the benefits of that growth will seep down much better and much in a much larger measure to those who need that, who need those benefits more than others.
Dr. Kumar, you made a very interesting point in your comment, and that was that, and you really alluded to those things in your writings as well, that India has had a complex transition or a complex movement towards over the years. Could you throw a little deeper light into this complex transition that we've actually had? Because, of course, as you say, we have been a little unlucky, of course, because of the pandemic, but there is also a huge movement that has actually happened, and India is complex. You also said the states and so on and so forth.
I mean, I have said often that India is unique in the history in the history of the world in deciding to undertake the three transitions together. And by and our forefathers, our constitution writers, etc., they insisted and they gave the challenge that India will undertake the social, political, and economic transitions simultaneously. It's never happened anywhere else in the world. In the sense that what you have always had is that you had a social transition followed by a political transition and then an economic transition. I mean, you can see it everywhere. I mean, for example, think about it. That the industrial revolution followed a period of agrarian reforms and a change and a shift and all of that and some uprisings and so on. And then after the industrial revolution took root in England, then came the democracy, and not before that. I mean, same thing with Soviet Union, same thing with China. Yeah, I know. I'm not sure whether you. I'm sure that you can see North America, where there was a wholesale scale change of the social fabric. By which I mean the treatment meted out to the Native Americans and how they were how they were in some sense expropriated, and then came the the political transition, the economic, and then the political first, and then the economic. So that's what happened there. But India, we decided to take, I think we are the only country so far which is trying to build market-based capitalism in a full-fledged democracy. For example, in when the American railroad movement went west, lands were just grabbed basically. In this, and that's how the railroads were built. And same thing in China. I mean, still, those two revolutions are not taking place in China. We have taken all these three transitions together, superimposed on this as if this complexity was not big enough. And by the way, let me just say here that our social and political transitions are pretty much complete. Social transition in the sense that we have the whole caste system, centuries old, is now surely broken. We've had a Dalit woman leader being the chief minister of the largest state of this country, for a full term and for three times. In the state of Tamil Nadu, that's where the social structure has completely, the pyramid has been reversed without the kind of bloodshed and the kind of sort of human loss that you've seen in other countries. And the political transition to whatever people may say, our political institutions now are firm, are entrenched, and are robust enough to prevent as it were, anybody trying to, erode them or change them. I think that's the economic transition is still ongoing, and that's what we need to focus on. That's what we are focused on. But superimposed on all of this is the fact that we are a federal country with greater diversity than Europe, stretching from London to Moscow. Greater diversity in every which way, and also very much of a very much of a robust federalism in the sense that the state they demand their sovereignty, fiscal and otherwise, as in a very strong manner. So, doing all of that, you think about Brussels alone running the entire thing from Moscow to London. Now we have to achieve that, and that is what is being achieved. And there are, of course, therefore, there are variables, there are parameters, there are costs which are involved, which have to be taken into account while taking forward this the economy, as it were. Now, the only thing that I want to add here is that again, the third thing is that the global condition has changed completely for us. While we're trying to change our while we are trying to complete our economic transition. You know, the world is now much more globalized. You know, the carbon constraint is real. You know, the technology turbulence is the highest, you know, it's ever been. You know, there is, you know, all of that. So I think that's what, you know, I've always referred to as the complexity of the Indian transition, the complexity of the Indian development, where none of the rules pretty much, you know, apply, which have been seen elsewhere. So I think, you know, we need to take that into account, uh, given also the fact that ours is such a young population, which, as I wrote in my book, The Exploding Aspirations, you know, now aspires for much more than what any other previous generations aspired for because of the information explosion that you've had and for the access that we've had. I think all of that makes it an amazingly interesting place to work in, but also an amazingly complex and difficult place to try and push things along and to achieve the sort of, you know, and move toward the targets of making India, you know, a prosperous and equitable country and economy that we want.
So, Dr. Kumar, just following up onto your point, like this whole complexity that we're really talking about, how do you see India's future in the coming years? Because I think India's future is a poverty-free, socially harmonious, and a political mature country. And as you said, I fully agree with you that India has seen transitions which are possibly not celebrated by many or not understood by many. The political change that we have actually seen with the kind of leaders that we have elected, it just means that we have started accepting people from across the board. That's the most beautiful thing that can actually happen in a country. We need to celebrate that more. In fact, of course, the youth that is there, the democratic processes we have. But how do you foresee the future for India in the coming 10 to 15 years?
You know, India's progress cannot be denied. You know, and India's progress in the past cannot be denied from where we were, you know, to a per capita income of $150 now to nearly, you know, more than $2,000, etc. But also, I think, you know, next 10 to 15 years, uh, India is beginning to and will surely address and overcome the challenges that we face. And there are substantial challenges that we face. There is no doubt about it. But I think, given now given now, you know, that we are beginning to, and we will even more going forward, earn our demographic and democratic dividends, both. I think that's the thing. And those dividends are now beginning to come up with us. I think we will achieve a rate of growth which will be the same as we did between 2003 to 2011. Already did that, of 8% plus, you know, real terms growth. That's going to be undeniable. That's our potential rate of growth of output, you know, and we will achieve it. You know, I mean, at the moment, you know, we're going through whatever we are going through, and if we do that, and if we actually grow up between 8 to 10% per annum for the next 20, 30 years, I think by the time we celebrate the centenary of our independence in 2047 or the centenary of our republic in 2050, you know, I think India would be, I'm sure, the second or if not the third largest economy in the world. You know, not just in PPE terms, but also the fact that our own people, the per capita income would I think near $10,000. You know, you know, or you know, in that period. Plus the fact that more we will be a far more sustainable economic system. So the changes that are happening in terms of our energy composition, in terms of our chemical-free agriculture, in terms of our adoption of our, you know, technology, electric mobility, you know, and so on. You know, we would have ensured that that we play our due role and we save ourselves from any ecological disasters that face us. And we will be a more equitable society as we go forward. Thomas Piketty has pointed out the fact that we are at the moment in a more inequitable society than we need to be. And I think surely enough, as we go forward and as our human development indicators improve, you know, on gross enrollment ratio the national education policy calls for a 50% higher education gross enrollment ratio by 2035. Once that is achieved, we will be a more equitable society as well. So I, in fact, see, I'm of course an incorrigible optimist, and therefore I see a golden period ahead of India. I see a golden period ahead of India, and I think the next 3 decades or so, the next 3 decades from now until 2050, will be India's decade. But with a very big if, an if which is that we sometimes, tend to get complacent because of our, strengths and because of our, of our resources. That complacency is completely unwarranted. Is completely unwarranted. That's the first thing. And I think we have all got to be on our toes. And the second thing is that I think we, and especially our elite, should refrain from trying to punch above its weight all the time on the global arena and focus much more on the domestic and the indigenous challenges that we have. Because that will come. If we do become the second or the third largest economy, as I'm saying we will, then rest of it will follow. I think those two are the big ifs, and if we can achieve that, I have no doubt in my mind that we will come. We are beginning to overcome the challenges and beginning to derive our two twin dividends, the demographic and the democratic ones, and therefore we are well on our way to becoming to becoming a middle to breaking out of the middle income trap and becoming, as it were, a sort of semi-prosperous economy. Just let me just add one thing here: is that there is no reason to, in our case, and therefore I think also there is no desire in the ordinary Indian mind to achieve the per capita income levels of the US and the OECD countries, etc. I think that's not necessary, because we as a country can achieve a same level of human happiness or human satisfaction at lower per capita income levels if we get things right in our terms, which is in terms of the share of the share of public goods in the consumption basket, the share of ecologically sensitive environment around us, etc. So I think that's the future that I see for India.
So, Dr. Kumar beautifully said as to what you're saying is that we have to start looking at things beyond GDP per capita. We have to look at human development, we have to look at happiness, and that's the core of the debate or the core of the focus that the government should always look at or people should look at. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I met somebody yesterday who is trying to estimate the gross environment product, because and there is of course a literature as to how much natural capital do you destroy, while generating 1 unit of GDP. And I think India will have to, look towards that. And I think our traditions of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, our traditions of being with nature and not against nature, not conquering nature, our traditions of being satisfied. I'm reminded actually of the, of the fact that there is a Professor H.K. Manmohan Singh in Patiala, Punjabi University, Patiala, who did his PhD, I think, from Cambridge, who long ago, because of his Indian background, wrote a thesis saying that it's not the law of maximizing utility or is not right, because how do you material utility, in the sense that that you don't need to maximize consumption or the fact that you hanker after everything, because the Indian tradition is that also of balancing your requirements. The Indian tradition is not after consumerism. So if you do that, we can develop our own economic thought, which is based on ecological sustainability, which is based on compassion, which is based on cooperation, which is based on if you like community, primacy of community, which is based on simple things like much multi-dimensional welfare matrix, which has material consumption as just one part of it and not the entire thing. So I think to that extent, and that's really what is important. And I remember the time when I used to attend Professor Sain's seminars in Oxford, when he was challenging the Benthamite utilitarian concept. That look, that's not the only matrix that is important. There are others too, and some of them can maybe not even as tangible, so that they require social capital, for example. I think it's an important thing that you need to. So I think we in India, because of what we have been, because of what we are, and what the challenges that we face, even in terms of our environment and equity and all of that. And I think we'll need to think differently for our own for our own goals rather than ape anybody. That won't take us anywhere at all.
Very, very interesting. And I think there's a PhD topic here that you just alluded to for somebody to really explore. But just a step back, Dr. Kumar. So, like you said, one of the India, there are many challenges that India faces. And I think for one, which you have been working very strongly on, and that is about the variation of growth within states or the kind of thing that actually happens. Like, so there seems to be that South grows better than, say, some of the Northeastern states or whatever. How do we really surmount that problem? I know Niti has been doing so many things to really create competitive federalism, but I think that is going to be one big challenge that India will have to face.
And it's a challenge that we haven't given enough attention to at the moment, actually. I mean, because across all dimensions, I mean, I was just looking yesterday at even the fertility rates. The 6 or 7 southern states are now reached replacement levels, and some are below replacement levels, and there are other states in the north. So starting from there, and the gross enrollment ratios and the literacy and and all of that, there is a real issue here, and there is one a bit of a north-south divide, but also there's a east-west divide. And the way I've always put it is that if that is India, if you draw a line here, it drops down around Kanpur. The west of Kanpur is probably twice as developed as the east of Kanpur, and this is the kind of fist of poverty that you get here. So how do we there is a constitutional mechanism in the finance commission which devolves revenues from the central government according to population, and also according to the degree of, if you like, backwardness, and the Gadgil formula tries to equate that too. I think the more and what we Niti Ayog are trying and will continue to try to do is to get away from this thing about a one size fit all. And I think what we need to do is to look at each state as a separate entity and analyze its specific circumstances and strengths and weaknesses, and do in some sense a SWOT analysis for every state and develop its own blueprint. Help work with it to prepare its own development blueprint, and play on its strengths and try to neutralize the weaknesses. Now let me explain. Punjab is a double landlocked state. It has Gujarat, it has Rajasthan, and then Gujarat before it comes to the port. Now, therefore, Punjab can't possibly achieve, economic transition by going after the same strategies as Kerala or Maharashtra can. Now, for the Punjab, therefore, you need to think through as to what are those high value products that Punjab can produce. How is that? How the education system, how the skill configuration will have to change, before for Punjab to make the next step. It was the most prosperous state in our country. Now it has slipped down the ranks. But for it to go back up, how will its agriculture get more high value? What would be now? So I'm just giving that example to you in the sense that each state in India requires an independent, analysis and an independent an independent approach for it to become, for it to become, for it to achieve the sort of economic transition and and to going forward. So that's the. Now the other thing, of course, is that GST is going to do a big role here, because it will create a unified national market, and that's very big, because the state borders will become less and less relevant as we go forward. Now that's so the goods will move now more freely because of the GST. The question is about services. Will they grow more, freely also across borders? And I think that's the challenge that we need to face, and we need to address it in a cooperative manner, in a cooperative federalist manner. And I think that can be achieved, and that because and I think the national education policy will also contribute to that, because it will it's while it is propagating instructions in mother tongue, it's also saying that we should learn another language, and therefore that will help. Finally, I would say that we need to pay much more attention to our education sector, because the more highly educated we are, the less will be the issues facing the movement of people across state borders. And one last thing, which is that I think we need to, as a part of that state development plan, we need to focus on what can be done locally, and in a sufficient manner to to take the and in a sufficient strength to take that state and its people forward, along with the neighboring countries, if you like. I did a 3-year project when I was Center for Policy Research on India and her neighbors. And the point and the fact is that West Bengal, Bangladesh, and Northeast form a very beautiful contiguous geoeconomic entity. Now, if we can think about development of that region in that way, I think it offers sufficient resources and demand and markets, etc., for it to grow forward. So I think that's the way I would look at India's divide at the moment. And one other thing which is also happening is the digital divide, which we are taking care of through the BharatNet. Now, if every village of India is connected to the optical fiber in the next 1,000 days, as the Prime Minister announced, in the last August 15, the next 2.5 years, I mean, this will create a revolution of amazing proportions, because that digital divide, and when it reaches every village, and so to every child and to every businessman and every trader, all of that is available at his or her doorstep in wherever he or she is. I think that will create an enormous momentum, and will maybe reduce and completely minimize the need for people to travel, etc., because they could be able to offer their services and produce their products and ship them from wherever they are. I think technology is going to help us in this in a very big way. Connectivity of all sorts, and that will strengthen the centripetal forces that are in India, and minimize the centrifugal forces, which are there at the moment, which could be there from time to time.
Very nice. But Dr. Kumar, as to what you're saying, and I think as I see it, like if you really have a plan for the states, I think that we can probably go deeper in terms of saying that we could have a plan for each of the cities as well, in terms of like what they can actually do, how they can actually move forward. Because even if we are able to do it for 20% or 30% of the states in India, I think it would have changed the trajectory of what we are really talking about. It would have unlocked India's potential to the greatest possible extent.
No, absolutely, and I think cities will be the drivers of growth and the drivers of change in India in the time to come. Smart cities, healthy cities, ecologically friendly cities, etc. And I think that's a very good unit to plan for. I mean, even the states are sometimes very large. And you've seen in all over the world that many cities have propelled the growth of the entire country, actually, in some way. I think, and that is very much amenable to, as I said, planning, urban, education, health, environment, industry, all of that can be planned at the city level. And I think you're absolutely right that if we pick, for example, 100 cities and give ourselves the target of having them grow at 10% per annum, it could change the geo economy, of the country completely. So that's and I think maybe it's time that the sort of ranking that you and I have been working on at the state level, we could try and do a city level ranking, and why not? Water conservation index, take the top 100 cities, and maybe that'll actually, that's a very beautiful thought, because then you can finally empower the city administration as it should be, and which it is not at the moment, you know, and the city, elected heads, whether they are mayors or whatever, could then see themselves as harbingers of change and growth, which they at the moment don't, I think. So I think that's a great thought. Thank you for bringing it up, and let's work on it together.
Look forward, sir. And so you also said something on digital divide, but I think to overcome the digital divide, the government had already sown so many things, especially the jam trinity, as you would say, Jandan Aadhaar, mobile, the identification and things, and that has been the base for this overcoming this digital divide. I think, from my point of view, one of the biggest things that has happened in India. For some odd reason, we don't celebrate it enough, and I'm sorry to say that, but Jandan Aadhaar mobile is possibly the biggest thing that has actually happened.
No, absolutely. There's no doubt about it, and I think the achievements of that is just incredible. 1.1 Aadhaar cards. Maybe a billion phones, mobile phones at the moment. Opening up nearly 450 million Jandan accounts. For which we won the Guinness record for opening the largest number of accounts in a single week, etc. Jam Trinity has been in some sense, the unsung miracle in India for the last 7 or 8 years. And I must compliment and thank Nandan, who did this, who started this work, and who is sort of, who sort of, took it forward into where it is. But this government actually uh, seized the opportunity, which was not being seized earlier, to take it to a new height, to take it to a new level. So today there are 420 benefit schemes which are now on direct benefit transfer because of JAM. We have got the JAM being used to sort of also transfer incomes to our farmers under the PM Kisan Nidhi. We are using JAM to open these accounts and transfer money under the Mudra Yojana, etc. So I think, but JAM is going to get to a new level when each one of our villages get connected, because you see that's where I think we would, because now then on the basis of that we will build a national digital health stack. On the basis of that, we will build, as it were, the Ayushman Bharat, the whole delivery thing. We can build on that the education, the MOOCs, the hybrid variety, the hybrid courses, etc. We can bring to bear much better monitoring of our preschool education and make it much more lively. So I think JAM and the further expansion of the digital connectivity in India will bring about a transformation that will be quite unprecedented, and the fruits of which will contribute to what I said, 8 to 10% rate of growth going forward in a sustainable and equitable manner.
And sir, you also said something very interesting in the beginning of your talk, and that was about complacency. And this is where I have to bring something very important. And like you have been one person, and I've been reading, and you've talked about bureaucracy in the country, and you've talked about the transformation of bureaucracy. And I think there has always been this debate: what happens here? How does bureaucracy contribute more, or whatever? What do you think can be changed? Because we cannot also take it away that it's a bureaucratic system which has really created a lot of sustainability in the system, a lot of leeway in the system. But how more can we change that?
I think I will repeat only what the Honorable Prime Minister has said in this regard. Because governance has to be far more transparent, accountable, and efficient. And that's the triple criteria that you have. And I think every action, every bureaucrat should be measured on those three. And I think that's the only way to do it, because and this is where we are beginning in a small way. The Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, the DMEO in NITI Aayog, is now evaluating all the government schemes, 300 of them, on the basis of their outcomes and output performance. Because we want to move towards that. And I'm glad to say that the Honorable Finance Minister and the Prime Minister are backing it up completely. And I think, therefore, also the new Commission for Capacity Creation that has been established, will also contribute to that. But it's very clear that we have to shift urgently, in fact, and sort of steadily towards a performance-based evaluation of our officialdom, at all levels. I mean, everywhere we should get KPIs, and this whole and evaluating them should also become more transparent, and annual targets be set and evaluated. And also, I think, as I said, transparency. The more you can put out in the public domain about what has been done, what is supposed to be done. The sort of simple thing that you hear sometimes that please put down all the schemes that are there applicable in any block or village on a board, on the public, sort of public, board. That sort of thing. I think this is the three elements which are good. Now, let me say here that a lot of focus is given on the central government, on when you talk about bureaucracy or efficiency and so on. My plea to everybody is that we should look at much more the states than the government. I mean, they are the ones where the rubber meets the road. That's where investors and people and citizenry, those state governments are much more in direct contact with everybody than the central government. And central government, a lot has happened already. So I think it's the states where this should change. And I'm convinced that change has already started, and it will only take deeper roots as we go forward.
And Dr. Kumar, we are moving towards the end of the conversation, but I have 2 or 3 more questions. But one is that if there is any point in time in the history of independent India, this government has fired the imagination of youth like no other government. I think youth is so motivated today to really make a contribution. We're already seeing some of the successes right now, the whole Zomato IPO, if I might say, or how entrepreneurship is happening. How do you think we can involve the youth in the development story even further? Because they are going to be the future of the country.
Absolutely right. And I have been saying this, that I start with a small example that, until 1942, India's independence movement was there and not there. It was, going along and so on. In 1942, Mahatma Gandhi gave the call for Quit India. And suddenly the independence movement became a people's movement. And everybody, whatever he or she was doing, said, I will do something to take that, to strengthen the movement for India's independence, whether you're a farmer, lawyer, and so on, etc. I think the same spirit now has to be built in for India's youth. We have to make development a national movement. We have to make development a Jan Andolan. And I think that's the word. And I think already, as you said, there's a great deal of excitement. And I think here, what we need to do is to make development a Jan Andolan and to make it much more participative. We need to create much bigger bonds of trust between the government and the people. And I think the agencies for that are industry associations, are CSOs, our academicians, and I think we can, and we in Niti Aayog have this wonderful vertical in the portal for CSOs, etc. And I think these bonds of trust will be built and are being built. Whereas when you see the leadership being focused entirely on the development of the country, and I think that's what, and I think I like the term that the term regime is being replaced by those who are in office or who are there to and I think that is the crux. We need to go out and talk to people, about that we are all on the same side. There's no us and them. And this whole notion, there's an old saying from Ramayana. Mantra said to Kekai that koi nrip hoye hame ka hani dasi chhodna baniho rani. That it doesn't matter to me who is governing. I'm going to remain what I'm going to be, what I'll remain what I am. That thing has to change. That thing has to change. That in the sense that, no, it does matter who is in office and how he or she is governing, and that I can have a role in that. I think that's where the young people will come in. But the good news, Amit, is that in Niti Aayog I see, and I just met 20 of them today, young people who have given up all kinds of jobs and careers to come and work for public policy. I think that's an amazing change that is happening, and I'm seeing that all the time. And I think this is, and that's the trend. I'm sure it will be strengthened as we in the government try even more to remain focused on delivering better governance and better delivery of outputs and outcomes.
And Rajiv ji, like it's a question that I've always urged to ask, and that is, I'm disappointed with the kind of debate that happens within the country, and then the developmental agenda that we have, which is fairly positive, it gets entangled in the political debates at points in time. Something like, say, the farm laws. I think it is one of the finest things that can be done for the people of India, for the consumers. And still, there is so much of politics. How do we get over it? Because, like, that's the most important thing for us, because that is something that possibly pushes us back a few notches.
Yeah, I think it's communication, communication, and communication. That's really it, and we underplay the importance of that. And I think this is where, and as I said, we are the only country who's trying to build a market-based, open market-based capitalism in a full-fledged democracy. Is that you can't do it by stealth any longer. There's no way that you can bring about any reform in this country by stealth. You have to bring about reform through building a consensus, through building a coalition, through building a hegemonic coalition for that. And I think that's what we need to do for everything that we do. We have to intervene in the narrative space and change the narrative to ensure that the benefits of a measure are seen in full measure, are seen fully, and rather than the cost be exaggerated at all points of time. And I think this is where the question about giving voice to the silent majority is very important. Now, all those who have benefited from Ujjwala and Saubhagya and Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, or the housing program, they are a silent majority. They express it, sometimes and so on. How to give voice to that? And it's up to us elite, and I'm including you and me in it, and I suppose all the participants here. It is for us to give the voice to their needs and to their concerns, and also to their what they have achieved and aspired, but also to get much more involved in the public discourse, for everything. And I think that is what I think is probably required at the moment to get over the political, as you said, obstacles that come up, because these will come up, and these democracy, there is no substitute for us for democracy. Democracy is the only way that that we know, and that we'll have to continue. And in a democracy, you need to make sure that the positive narrative remains dominant and not the negative one, and also that a vocal minority does not seize the center space, which has happened in this case. Because the large majority of farmers are supportive of this. There's no voice to that. And they're getting on with it because they know that it's their benefit. Yeah, it's a very small minority of farmers who have created this. So that's I think, to repeat myself, communication, better communication, and coalition building.
Absolutely.
I think that's the key.
And just one last point. Like you said in the beginning, that COVID has put some bits of effect on the Indian economy. But I also do believe that we are probably at the cusp of something like a roaring 20s for India. After the previous pandemic, the world saw the roaring 20s in 1920s. Don't you think India is possibly at the cusp right now? Because once it starts moving, it is just going to be a scorching pace of growth, development, and social progress.
Well, I've said already that I'm an incorrigible optimist, and I'll remain one. But let me not say anything that will enhance our complacency. I mean, because we are so good at it, and therefore my mantra at the moment is, put your head down, get on with it, focus even more at what you're doing, and do it better, and do it as well that you become globally recognized, and the rest will follow. But I'm sure that we will have, as I said, a golden period ahead of us, but only and only if each one of us, you know, delivers on what we are at, we are supposed to do. And I think let's keep it there, because otherwise, as I said, I neither do I want to boast, nor do I want to show anything. But it's let me put it this way: the potential is there right in front of us. We need to seize it with both hands to get this country to where it is supposed to be, and it will be there. Let me put it like that.
And Dr. Kumar, I have to ask you to put your professorial hat for a moment. What do you think you would like to share with the audience? Three best books of your life that you must have read, or three books that you would suggest that all of us should really read?
Well, one is which I read recently, and that is a book by somebody called Kai-Fook Lee on AI superpowers.
Yes.
So that has opened up my mind completely on what happens there. That's one that I would recommend very strongly for everyone to read. The potential and the dangers of AI are there for laid out beautifully by the gentleman who used to work for Microsoft in China and so on. Anyway, that's one. The second one I think I would recommend again is how the 100-year marathon. I forget the author, but it's about China, as to how they decided that they will 100-year race to get to the top again and become the middle kingdom. And there are lots of lessons there for us. There are lots and lots of lessons there for us. There's a second one. And the third one is a bit spiritual, but I think it's a must, and which is The Secret Life of Plants. And it's a picador thing. It's got a 40 or 45 page bibliography at the end. So that taught me how materialism is just one part of us, and how the spirit and the spiritual part of us is in fact a more necessary and bigger part. It will change my life. I hope it will change everybody else's life who reads it, because it will take you towards the spirit, towards getting the spiritual depth and satisfaction. That is absolutely essential if you want to be a complete human being who is being made in the image of God, as they say. So I think those are the three ones that I would recommend.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. This has been such a fascinating interaction. I think one thing that I take away is that we should all make a contribution towards the country and really move forward. That's the most powerful thing that I take away. Of course, there is such a huge potential, but to really achieve it, we have to go beyond complacency and make our targets, and each individual should really work towards it. So I look forward to being in touch. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to work with you and have this interaction with you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.